Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint, Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Laura and I'm delighted to be joined by Leon Gordon, MVP, Partner, Pomerol Partners, United Kingdom, who will present the topic, Solving Business Problems Using Machine Learning in Power BI. Now, just an apology for the delayed start this morning. We're just having a few technical difficulties, but we're all ready to go now. So remember to join in on the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is #ESPC23. Don't forget to check out the Resource Centre. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the Content tab at the top. Continue your learning by joining us for our next webinar, Create Your Own Power Platform and Logic Apps Connector, which takes place tomorrow, the 25th of January from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. CET. For full details, please check out sharepointeurope.com/Power Platform Week. At ESPC 22, Scott Hanselman delivered a keynote about what's beyond membership, what the difference between membership and sponsorship is, what the role of the senior engineer as a colleague to an early in-career engineer is, what we must do to welcome the next generation of creators, and what are your responsibilities. Please visit sharepointeurope.com for the full recording of this keynote session. The European Power Platform Conference 2023 is coming to Dublin. Join us from the 20th to the 22nd of June this year to power up your knowledge and connections. Book now at sharepointeurope.com/European Power Platform Conference and use the code EPPC23 at checkout to get 30% off. The ESPC 23 call for speakers is now officially open. Be part of something truly special. Speak and engage with the leading experts, IT professionals, developers, and business decision makers at ESPC 23, Europe's premier Microsoft 365 and Azure conference. This is your chance to take a leading role within the conference and the community, sharing your in-depth knowledge, passion, and experience with your peers, in turn helping empower the Microsoft 365 and Azure community to professional success. Please visit sharepointeurope.com/submit-speak-ESPC to find out more. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you might have into the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Centre, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Leon. Hello, Leon.
Hi, Laura. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Leon. How are you?
Yes, fantastic, fantastic. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much for passing over. Hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yeah, that's perfect. We can see that.
Fantastic. And thank you everybody today for joining us at the ESPC. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. And today we're going to take a look at solving business problems using machine learning in Power BI. Okay, so first and foremost, as Laura mentioned, my name is Leon Gordon. I'm a current Microsoft Data Platform MVP, and you can also connect with me directly on LinkedIn. For those of you that are involved in communities like this one, I'm also the founder of the Microsoft Power BI UK user group and the Data DNA Dataset Visualization group, which is a monthly challenge whereby we give a freely available data set to our community, and you get the chance to visualize that as part of a challenge to win up to $400 US worth of Amazon vouchers and also some other goodies within the industry. So please do feel free to join us there, and I can share these slides with you after if you haven't had an opportunity to get the links as of yet. Okay, it will be great for those of you that are in the chat to let us know where you're joining us from today, and let's make it a very interactive session. So with that being said, what will we cover today? So first and foremost, we're going to take a look at what is machine learning, often referred to as ML. We'll then take a look at how we can benefit from machine learning in Power BI, how to create a machine learning model in Power BI Premium or Premium per user, often referred to as PPU, and then I'll also show you how you can do this for free with an unlicensed version, and then give you some resources to continue learning. Now, it is worthwhile noting this is going to be a very demo heavy session, and we are going to cover quite a lot of topics. So I am going to move at pace and gloss over some of the more technical aspects. So with that being said, what is machine learning? Well, machine learning is a branch of artificial intelligence, often referred to as AI, that teaches computers to do what comes naturally to humans and animals, which is to learn from experience. Machine learning algorithms use computational methods to learn information directly from data without relying on a predetermined equation as a model. So with that being said, the two key takeaways that I want you to take from how we're going to use machine learning is we're going to use it to enable the computer to learn from experience and to learn information directly from data. So how can we benefit from machine learning within Power BI? Well, there are a multitude of ways, okay? We can do real-time predictions, customer churn analysis, customer leads and conversion, and we can even look at predicting fraud. Now, in today's session, as I mentioned, we are going to solve a business problem using machine learning, and that business problem is going to revolve around customer leads and lead conversion. So I want you to imagine, if you will, a fictional sales organization. Now, with any outbound sales organization, they tend to either buy or generate sales leads. Those sales leads then have a sales call. I'm sure some of you are familiar with getting cold calls asking you to either buy insurance or trying to sell you something. They then ultimately have a follow-up, which may in turn be converted into a sale. So as you'll notice from this visual, you generally tend to start with a large amount of sales leads, and as they go down through the funnel, they start to thin out in terms of those that actually do convert into a sale. Now, the problem for this fictional organization is that they are spending a large amount of money on leads. As we can see here, a £3 million spend. Now, their conversion rate is arguably very low in the fact that they only have a 4.3% conversion rate. So their problem is actually twofold. One, they're spending a large amount of money on leads that don't actually convert. So wouldn't it be great if we could use machine learning to actually increase that conversion rate up from 4.3%, which ultimately would enable them to have more revenue? And wouldn't it be great if we could only cherry pick those leads that we think will actually convert for us, ultimately enabling us to either spend less on leads or spend the same amount but on leads that are more than likely to convert? So with that being said, let's see how we can do this using machine learning in Power BI. And I'll just go into our first demo. Now, as I do this, please bear in mind that no machines are actually harmed in the making of this demo, even though this robot does not look very, very happy. Okay, so let's go over to our Power BI service. Now, the Power BI service is the web-based area, for lack of a better term, for Power BI. Now, to do this, I'm going to use our sandbox environment. And this sandbox environment is actually a premium per user environment. And you can also do this on Power BI Premium as well. So let's go ahead and select new. And then let's start with a new data flow. Okay. Now, Microsoft have recently released a data mart preview functionality for Power BI. So we are being prompted to see if we would like to use that. But for the purposes of today's demo, we're going to continue with a data flow. Now, once we've actually looked to create our new data flow, what we need to do is actually get some data. Now, fortunately, I have some data prepared for us already in the GitHub environment, and I will share this with you following this session. And we have two data sets that we're going to actually use for this demonstration. Okay. Now, the first of our data sets is actually going to be our sales training data. Now, when you're actually training any machine learning model, you're going to need to use test data to train the model on. Now, for the purposes of today's demo, we're actually going to use historic data. Now, that historic data is customers that have either previously purchased with our company or previously not purchased. Now we can see that some of the attributes that we have for these customers is their age, marital status, gender, yearly income, the total amount of children they have, the number of those children that are still at home, their education, their occupation, whether or not they're a house owner, the number of cars they own, their state, their zip code, and the column that we're most interested in, which is whether they were a buyer with us or not, represented by true or false. Now, the easiest way to get this data to begin with, let me just jump back. Now, the easiest way to get this data to begin with is to go to the raw version of this file, okay? What this will do is give us the actual raw CSV content, which we can just copy that URL and then head back over to our data flow. Now, once we're back at our data flow, we want to define a new table, which will enable us to choose a data source. Let's go to add new tables. And then those of you that are familiar with Power BI will be very familiar with Power Query in the service. Now, the file that we actually want to import is a text CSV file. So we're going to use our text CSV connector. Okay. Now, as you saw earlier, I was able to copy the raw version of this file, and we're going to just paste that URL directly into our file path or URL. We're going to go ahead and select next. And in the background, Power BI will actually parse the data being presented to it and start to identify that data set. And as we can see here with 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, etc., it's actually identified the underlying data types for the data set and also notified us that our first row is headers. Okay. Now, because that's the case, we don't need to do any transformations to our data here. So we can just go ahead and select transform data and ultimately just save and close. Okay. Excellent. Now, that has very simply enabled us to get our sales training data directly into what's known as a Power BI data flow. Now, I'm just going to call this data flow MLESPC. And then what I recommend that you do is always leave a detailed description on any of the objects you're creating when developing. Not only does it help your colleagues in the future, but it also helps your future selves. Now, as I don't have any colleagues with me today, but I hopefully have a future self, I'm just going to leave a very verbose description, which is this is a description, but please be as descriptive as you can with your objects. I'm going to go ahead and select save. Now, what will happen next is Power BI will prompt me to see if I would like to either refresh this data flow now or set a refresh schedule if I wanted to continue to refresh this on a cadence. Now, I don't want to do either, so we can let that disappear. So now we have our sales training data available to us in the service. Now, what we also need to go and get, if we just head back over to our GitHub repository, is our prospective buyer data. Now, our prospective buyer data is our sales lead information. So this is lead data that we saw at the top of that funnel previously that we haven't called as of yet, we haven't emailed, and we don't know whether they're going to buy with us or not. Now, what you'll notice in this data set is it comes from a transactional system, as it has a prospective buyer key and an alternative key. They also have a first name and a last name. And then you'll notice that we have common attributes with our training data. So we have our age, marital status, gender, yearly income, and so on and so forth. But what you'll notice at the end here is that we do not have a column to identify whether or not these individuals were buyers with us. And again, this is because this is our lead data and we don't know whether they're going to be buyers for us or not as of yet. So let's go ahead and get that raw version again of the file. Come back over to our Power BI data flow. And what we want to do now is add a table. Okay, to do that, we just select add tables on the ribbon. And we'll go through that now familiar process, being greeted by Power Query Online. We're going to use our text CSV data connector. And again, we're going to paste our raw URL into our file path or URL and go ahead and select next. Now, once again, in the background, as you can see, Power BI will just go ahead and connect to that data source, passing the information underneath, and again, identifying correctly the data types, and that our first row is actually headers within this CSV. We don't need to make any transformations to this data, so we can go ahead and select Transform Data and Save and Close. Okay. Now, what will happen is, once again, we'll be prompted whether we want to refresh our data or set a refresh schedule. For the purposes of today's demo, we don't. We just want to go ahead and close that. And you'll now notice that we have our sales training data and our prospective buyer data available to us in our Power BI data flow, which is fantastic. This is a great starting point. We have both historic data to train our machine learning model, and we also have our lead data that we can go ahead and use a machine learning model to base predictions off of. Now, what we want to do next is actually create a machine learning model. So to do this, you'll notice our ribbon option here, which is machine learning models. So let's go ahead and select this. Okay, now as we're using the Power BI service and the inbuilt wizard, it's going to walk us through a nice UI which will tell us what we'll do to create our machine learning model. So first and foremost, we'll create and train our model. To do this, we'll select our training data, which is our historic customer data. We'll then choose a model type. We'll then go ahead and train our machine learning model before looking at ways that we can either improve it by iterating and retraining, or apply it directly to our leads data to get our predictive insights. So let's go ahead and get started. Right, to get started, first and foremost, we'll be asked what we want to predict. Okay, so as we know, we want to predict whether or not our sales training data, an individual will become a buyer. Okay, so let's go ahead and select next. Now, what's happening at the moment is just in the background. Once again, Power BI is passing the data that's been given to it, and it's actually recommending us a prediction model. Okay, as it mentions here, the model learns from our data to predict whether or not an outcome will be achieved. And in this instance, that is exactly what we want. We want to predict whether an individual will become a buyer. Now, if this wasn't the outcome that we wanted, we could actually select a different model. Okay, so by doing this, we have two different categories of models available to us. We have classification, and we also have regression. Now, within classification, we have the binary prediction model, which, as I mentioned, is predicting whether or not an outcome will be achieved. And this is determining the likelihood of a sales lead converting, or the probability of a customer responding to a marketing campaign. So this is indeed the correct model that we would like. Alternatively, we have general classification, which can be used for predicting groups of good, bad credit, or those that potentially require further analysis. And we have my favorite, which is regression, which is estimating a numeric value, which is generally used for estimating house prices based on different market factors. Okay, but as we know, Power BI has already correctly selected our binary prediction model. So with that being the case, we want to select the buyer outcome that we're most interested in. So for today, we want to know when a buyer is true, when an individual is actually a buyer with us. Now, when we have a match and our prediction matches our target value, we're going to call that individual a buyer. And when we have an incorrect prediction, we're going to call that not a buyer. Okay. So let's go ahead and select next. Now, what happens again is in the background, Power BI just passes that data that we presented to it, and it's actually going to ask us which attributes within our data set have a high correlation or a low correlation with the outcome of it being a buyer. Now, it's worthwhile noting that within machine learning, these attributes are actually referred to as features. Okay, so from now forward, I will refer to these as features. So what Power BI is actually telling us is that the age feature, the yearly income, the total children, whether or not an individual is a house owner, the postal code, all have a high correlation with the outcome of our individual being a buyer. Now, the ones that it's actually not selected have a low correlation with the outcome of our individual being a buyer, and therefore are not recommended for selection. Now, me being so inclined, I'm actually going to select the majority of these just so we can invoke a little bit of chaos in today's session, and I can actually show you why Power BI correctly suggests that we do not use these features. So let's go ahead and select next, and then we can name and train our model. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm just going to call this ML-ESPC. Always please do leave a description on your work. Again, I would just use this as a description for the purposes of today's session. Now, in terms of building a machine learning model, we actually have the ability to train our model for a certain amount of time. Now, I don't know about yourselves, but generally I like to think at least that when I train and practice at something for a significant amount of time, I improve. It's not always the case, but I like to think it is anyway. Now, this is the case for machine learning models. Now, within Power BI, we have the ability to train from 5 minutes to 360 minutes, okay? Generally, the longer that you train your model, the more accurate the predictions, okay? Now, for the purposes of today's webinar, I will set this down to the lowest possible time, which is 5 minutes, because I'm sure you've all got more to do with your day than sit and wait for the machine learning model to train. So what will happen next? Well, actually, Power BI will just take 80% of the data that we presented to it, and it will use that to train the model, training it to understand and base its predictions on. It will then use the remaining 20% of that data to test those predictions, okay, to see whether those predictions are correct. So let's go ahead and save and train our model. Okay. Now, those of you that are familiar with Power BI will be presented back to our workspace home screen as such, and we'll be able to see that our data flow is actually refreshing, as we can see at the top here. If I just go back to our sandbox workspace by selecting on the side here. Just bear with me, hopefully it will take us back. Let's just give it a little refresh. And let's go back to our sandbox workspace. And what I generally do at this moment in time as well, whilst our machine learning model is just training, is just pause and take time for any questions that there may be. And that's great. I'm guessing we have no questions for the time being, which is great. So just bear with me. I'll just load up another page of the service and just head back over to our sandbox environment. Now, what you'll be able to notice that we have ML-ESPC, and this little icon here can show us that that's currently refreshing. Now, what I will do, I won't wait for that to refresh. I'll actually pick up a version of that that's already refreshed, and we can move forward with what will happen once you've actually created and trained your machine learning model. Okay. So once you've created and trained your machine learning model, you'll be presented with what's known as a training report. So I'll just go ahead and open this. Let's open this directly in here. Okay. Now, as it says here at the top here, we have our machine learning model training report. And this report is going to summarize the model performance and training details. And it's also going to enable us to find an optimal threshold for defining our business outcome. Now, this is a pre-generated Power BI report as well. And what I'm going to do, as I mentioned, is I'm not going to go into too much detail around the technical nuances of the report. I'm just going to pick out elements that I think it's worthwhile noting. Now, the model performance, so we can see here that our model performance is actually 79%, okay? Now, anything between 70% and 100% is good to aim for in terms of the performance. So we haven't done too badly at 79% here, okay? Now, as you may have noticed earlier when I decided to invoke a little bit of chaos, we can see the top predictors. Now, Power BI, as I mentioned, told us that some of those features had a low correlation with the outcome of a buyer. And we can start to see this on this visual here. Now, by selecting, for example, age, we can start to see a defined pattern of who buys with this organization. So we can start to see that generally an individual that buys with us is either 46 years and lower, or between 46 and 59. So our target buyer is generally either below 59 years of age. Their marital status is generally single, and we'll just see this on the population here. And the total number of children that they also have is generally 1. Okay, so we can start to see that our features are now building a pattern of what a buyer looks like for us. Okay, now what I'm just going to do is just show you this matrix here. It's known as a confusion matrix. Now I'm just going to show you the absolute best way to read this, so just bear with me as I get this up for you. Let's go with this image here. Now, the quickest and easiest way to read a confusion matrix is by looking at this segment in the top left. Now, this value in the top left is how many positive predictions are actually true. Okay, so this is how many buyers our machine learning model has predicted to be buyers that's correct. Okay, in the bottom right-hand corner here, we have the opposite, which is how many buyers our machine learning model has predicted correctly to not be buyers. Now, in the bottom left and top right, we also have false positives and false negatives. For today's session, what we're most interested in is our true positive predictions, okay? So the top left-hand most row. So as we can see in the confusion matrix, we actually have quite a high value here. So this means that we're actually predicting quite well. Now, again, without going too much technical, without becoming too technical, we have what's available to us called recall and precision. Now, if I put this value more towards the increase of precision, you'll notice that our values here change quite significantly. Okay, we're now getting a lot more true false predictions. Okay, now a good starting point for this value is generally 0.5, so somewhere in the middle, and you'll notice that kind of smooths out our predictions. I'm just going to leave this value like that for the time being. Okay. Next, we can take a look at our accuracy report. Again, glossing over some of the detail here, we can see that we have a 79% accuracy, and a quick way to read this graphic here is that the black dotted line at the bottom would be effectively a random guess from our machine learning model. The teal dotted line at the top would be an ideal guess, and we can see where our yellow line in the middle is, and again we're somewhere in the middle in terms of the targets that we've identified. Let's finally take a look at our training details. Okay, we just scroll to the top. Now this will just give us some insight into how our model was actually trained. So the amount of sample rows, the amount of training rows, the final model that was used, and how many iterations that were ran. Okay. Now we know that this machine learning model has only trained for 5 minutes, so we've only had 32 iterations of that training to be done, and we can start to see that model quality, how it differentiates by iterations. Okay. Then we go into a bit more detail around our features, and also we have here our threshold details. Now, once we're happy with the machine learning model, we don't want to make any changes, we can go ahead and apply the model. Now, what we mean by applying the model is actually running these predictions against our lead data. Okay, so to do this, we want to go to our prospective buyer table as our input table. We want to have a new output column. So this outcome is actually going to be our prediction column. And if you were following this along at home, you would go ahead and select save and apply. Now, as we're looking at a version of this that has already completed, I'm actually going to go ahead and select cancel. Okay. What will happen once you've applied your machine learning model is if we go back to our tables, you will remember we started with 2 tables. This was our sales training data and our prospective buyer data. We now have 4 further tables which have been added to this data set. So first and foremost, we have our training data. Now, if you remember, this is that 80% of our data set that was used to train the machine learning model. We then have that remaining 20%, which is our testing data. And the table that we're actually most interested in is our prospective buyer enriched buyer prediction data. Now, this data set actually has our lead data, which has now been enhanced with our machine learning model predictions. So how can we use this in Power BI? Well, let's go ahead and start a new Power BI report. And then we can look to connect to that data set and show how very quickly we can bring a lot of power and business value to our organization. Okay. So Power BI desktop will just load for us. Okay, let's use the wizard and let's go to get data. Okay, now in this example, what we want to get data from is our data flow. Okay, let's go to data flows. By double clicking on data flows there, it will establish a connection to our Power BI service. Then we'll be able to go through our workspaces. Now, the workspace that we're interested in, sorry, I have signed in already. Let's see if we can connect. Okay, let's sign in again. You can never be too secure. Excellent. Let's go ahead and connect. Right, so as we know, we want our sandbox workspace. Now, by opening our sandbox workspace, we can see all of our data flows and data sets. And the one that we're most interested in is ML webinar deployed. Okay, now by opening the underlying objects, we want our prospective buyer enriched buyer prediction data. So let's just highlight that. Okay, now we should get a brief preview. Now you can see that this is our lead data because we have our buyer key and our alternate key, first name, last name, etc. And what I'm going to do, if I just go to transform data, I'll be able to show you this in a bit more detail. Okay. As I mentioned, we have applied our machine learning model predictions to our lead data. Now this means that we have additional columns within this data set. Okay, so let's just scroll to the right. And you'll now notice that we actually have the buyer prediction prefix. Okay, now we have our outcome. This outcome column is our machine learning model predictions. We also have a prediction score. Now this is the accuracy of those predictions based on our machine learning model. We then have a couple more metadata columns. So this is our prediction explanation, which is why the machine learning model predicted what it did in JSON format. And then we also have our explanation index. Now, for reporting purposes, we don't need to worry about these 2 columns here. What we're most interested in is our prediction outcome and our prediction score. So let's go ahead and load that data into Power BI. And it should only take a few minutes. It's a relatively small data set. Okay, excellent. We've now loaded our data. And let's see how powerful this can become. So let's take our first name and our last name for a lead. Okay, we're going to put them into a very rudimentary table. Let's also go for our prediction outcome and let's go for our prediction score. Okay, and then let's just make a very rudimentary slicer, which is our outcome. Okay, now if we just expand these out, what we'll be able to see here is that we're actually able to, let me just take away the summarization from this so that it's very clear. So those of you that are familiar with Power BI will know that sometimes it applies an automatic summarization, and we don't want to summarize in this instance. Okay, so what we can start to see here is that we actually have a list of all of our leads, a prediction on whether they would become a buyer with us or not, and the accuracy of that prediction. Now, the higher the prediction score, the more accurate it is. So what we can now do is just filter. Let's filter those leads to where we have a true prediction, and let's actually sort them based on the highest prediction score. And then what you'll be able to see is that we now have a list of leads that we can give to the organization or to our sales team that our machine learning model predicts would be our target buyer. Ultimately, we can do the same for those leads that our machine learning model predicts won't be our target buyer by changing our filter to false. Okay. So now, very quickly and very powerfully, we're able to empower our organization to go ahead and either contact the leads that are more likely to convert, hopefully bringing us in more revenue and more conversion rates. And we're also able to say to our leads, our lead purchaser, actually, we don't want to purchase these ones, so we can actually save money from that perspective. Okay, so that's the end of our first demo. Fantastic. So what I'm going to do now is very, very briefly, because I'm aware that we're getting quite close to time, is show you another approach that enables you to do this without the use of Power BI Premium or Premium per user. Now, for those of you that are unaware, Premium per user costs $20 per month as a license fee, and Power BI Premium starts at $5,000 per month for the smallest premium capacity. Now, machine learning or cognitive services is not available in Power BI Pro or Power BI Desktop for free. So we do have another way to do this by using Python. And there are some limitations to this approach. So we don't have any machine learning ops, often referred to as ML ops. We can only use the Power BI personal data gateway. It becomes very difficult to manage dependencies, and this is no way scalable, okay? This is just an art of the possible. So to do this, we need to actually use some alternative tools, okay? If you want to scan the QR code there, that will take you to the GitHub environment that I mentioned earlier. If not, I can obviously send out links after this session. Within that GitHub environment is also this presentation deck as well. So to do this, to utilize this technique, we actually need to use a tool called Anaconda. Now, in my opinion, Anaconda is by far the easiest way to get a Python or R data science machine learning environment set up on your local system. And we're also going to use a Python library called PyCaret, which is an open source low code machine learning library that allows us to achieve what we've just achieved using just Python. Okay. So with that being said, as I mentioned, I am going to skip over quite a lot of this because this does become fairly technical, but I'm just going to give you some insight. So to get Anaconda, you go to anaconda.com, download the free version. There's no charge for personal use, and you may need to also implement C++ build tools. Okay. If you are missing any of the dependencies. Now, once you have Anaconda on your system, you can actually use what's known as the Anaconda command prompt. Okay, the Anaconda prompt to install PyCaret directly in this environment. So what you need to do is use around 4 lines of code. So first of all, I'm going to use the activate command to activate an environment called data science _UG. And you can think of an environment just like a container or a folder. So you'll notice that we've changed from base to our data science _UG container. Next, what we want to do is use the conda command to install pip. Now, pip is a package manager, which enables us to actually install packages like PyCaret within an environment. And pip has already been installed on this system, so this should hopefully go through and just satisfy this request very quickly. And then ultimately, once we've installed pip, I'm not going to update this, so let's go ahead and say no. Okay, once we have pip installed on this, we can actually use the pip command to install PyCaret. Okay, so what you'll notice, again, hopefully this should just go through and resolve on this system, but within 3 lines of code, we now have an environment available to us whereby we can use Python and PyCaret directly within Power BI. Now, what we need to do is make Power BI aware that this environment exists. Okay, so to do this, you use options and settings. You go ahead over to options. And then what we want to do is just make Power BI aware of where our new Python environment is. So let's go to Python scripting. And then here you'll notice that we have our Anaconda 3 environment and that data science underscore UG. Now, once you've set that, you can go ahead and just select OK. And Power BI is now aware that Python exists and where that Python library is on your system. Now, because we started relatively late due to some technical issues, I'm just going to give you a very high level guide to this approach, as I would like to allow some time for questions as well. So within our GitHub environment, we also have a number of Python scripts available to us, okay? So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, generally, what I would do is go through each of these in a slight bit more detail than I'm going to today, okay? But each of these Python scripts can be used and called within Power BI to perform exactly what we've done within the Power BI service, okay? So you'll notice that our first script is just going to actually encode our data ready for our Python and our PyCaret module. Okay, our second script will go ahead and do that data set training. Okay, so under the hood, what we're doing is exactly the same as what we did to train our machine learning model in Power BI. And then ultimately, our third script will actually do the encoding of our lead data ready for us to apply our predictions finally. Now, this final script is generally the smallest, but what we're doing is just applying our machine learning model to our lead data. Now, for completeness, I actually have an end-to-end script, okay, which actually does all of those scripts in a single instance, and that's what I'm going to show you today, okay? So with that script, what we can do is just copy and paste this, and I do have a pre-done version of this. So if I just go into edit query, if you were doing this at home, what you can do is literally, as we load, we can choose our data source to be a Python data source. Okay. And then within that Python data source, you're actually able to define a Python script. So you can just copy and paste the end-to-end script, which I've just showed you. Go ahead and select OK. What this will do is it will present you with this screen, which gives you a final predictions and a table. Okay, you can just click on that table option. And then what this will do, let's just run that again, just refresh this preview. Then what that will do is actually give you the finalized version of this data set. So what you'll notice for this is that we haven't used Power BI Premium. We haven't used Power BI Premium per user. We've just used a Python script to go ahead and do exactly the same as what we've done in Power BI. So rather than use time to load, I'm just going to close this and show you directly in Power BI the output. Okay, so you'll notice that we now have our first name, our last name, our label, which is our prediction outcome, and finally we have our score. Okay. Now again, I'm just going to lay this out in exactly the same way as what we achieved by using Power BI Premium. So let's set this to be true. So where an individual is predicted to become a buyer. Let's set our score to be descending. And then what you'll see is that we've been able to achieve the same outcome. So we can see individuals that we believe, or the machine learning model believes, will become a buyer. So we can actually give these to our sales team to go ahead to call. And we also have individuals that our machine learning model predicts will not become a buyer. So we can either give these back or not call on them at all. So you can see that we've been able to do that very quickly again, but we did need to have some Python knowledge to do this. Okay. So I know we've covered quite a lot of high-level technical concepts in today's session, but I wanted to give you an overview of how you can get started and solve business problems in Power BI, whether you're using premium per user, or whether you want to try and do it for free in Python. Okay, so hopefully we now have a vision. And how can we take it to a new level? Well, we can do lots of different data science techniques using Python in Power BI. So we can do outlier detection, topic distribution, and we can also look at doing association rule mining. Okay. So as I mentioned, I will give you some more resources, and you can go ahead and download this presentation. One of my favorite books by fellow MVP is Extending Power BI Using Python and R. That's by fellow MVP Luca Zavarella. If you are interested in data science, then kdnuggets.com and towardsdatascience.com are fantastic websites to stay up to date with new ongoings in the industry. Also, as I mentioned, anaconda.com, that free resource to get up and running with Python and R. And Microsoft has some fantastic documentation available in terms of machine learning as well. So with that being said, I'd like to thank you for your time and then hand over for any questions.
Brilliant, Leon. Thanks so much for a great presentation. It was really great to learn about how we can use machine learning in Power BI to solve different business problems. So we're going to move on to the questions and answers part now. So should you wish to ask a question, please type it into the questions window now. So we've had a couple of people asking if it would be possible to share the slides. If you don't mind sharing them, Leon, I would be able to send them to the attendees along with the webinar recording after the webinar, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, of course. As I mentioned, what I would do is I'll give you the link to this GitHub environment, this GitHub repo, and you'll notice that we have the slide deck available in here. Okay.
Brilliant. Thanks a million. So just one question we have in here is, someone is wondering, do they need any type of paid license for machine learning in Power BI?
So if you want to use the machine learning that I showed using the Power BI service, then you will need to either have a premium per user, which is a $20 per month license, or alternatively, you will need to use Power BI Premium, which starts at $5,000 US for a premium capacity. If you want to use the Python example that I showed you towards the end, that's absolutely free, but does require a bit more of technical knowledge of Python.
Brilliant, Leon. Thank you. And just another question then, someone's asking, does this need to be updated often?
Yes. So what tends to happen with machine learning models is that we get something called model drift. Okay. Now this happens because, as you can imagine, with a sales organization, we have different types of customers that might buy next week, might buy next month, and might buy next year. So what's true in terms of what a buyer looks like to this organization today may not be true in 6 months to a year's time. So it's always best practice to update, refine, and redefine your machine learning models to ensure that you're not getting that model drift.
Brilliant, Leon. Thank you. And another question here is, what else can we do with machine learning in Power BI?
Well, the list is fairly endless, I should say. So as I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite machine learning models is regression. Now that can be used to predict housing prices, albeit probably prior to COVID, with all of the nuances we saw there. But for anybody that's interested in purchasing a property or likes to buy and sell properties in the future, this can be fantastic to start to predict what property prices would look like. So for example, if you bought a house today and you wanted to sell it in 5 years' time, would you actually make or lose money? So there's so many different ways we can use machine learning.
Brilliant, Leon. And then the last couple of questions here in the questions box were just comments from people saying that they really enjoyed your session and it was a great session. So thanks again, Leon. And on behalf of the ESPC community, thank you for taking the time today to carry out this webinar. We really appreciate it.
Excellent, my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Brilliant, thanks so much. So this is the end of today's webinar. Please find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource centre. Thank you for joining us today. Take care and goodbye.